Welcome novices and acolytes to the Sisterhood, presented by DuneNewsNet.com and What the Force. Join us on this meta-mythic journey through the Dune universe.
Welcome novices to the Sisterhood. I'm Hannah, your host, and joining me is Marie-Claire Gould from What the Force. Thank you so much for being here, MC. You're welcome as always, and I am excited to talk about twice. This seems to be a consistent theme in this show so far. Definitely. You can follow the Sisterhood podcast at Podcast Above All across social media platforms, as well as the Dune Newsnet YouTube channel to be notified for all episodes when they drop. And you can find me at Shahaya Springs on Twitter and Blue Sky. And where can people find you, MC? So I'm most well known for my Star Wars podcast, What the Force. But if you want to follow me personally, I'm Marie C. Gould on most platforms. So Blue Sky is primarily where I've been posting recently. And let's jump into some questions for the pod. The first one is from Magic Myth Zero on the What the Force Discord. How can we interpret the internal whispers that the sisters have? Also, a remark, have you noticed that the Emperor's dining space seems to be in a whale-like carcass, like literally in the belly of a whale? You can answer first, because I know what my interpretation of them is. Yeah, my interpretation is that the whispers are the voices of the others, and so they're very specific to the feminine line that Valya comes from. And so some people think she's a traitor or that she's going to bring the downfall in her line, right? She has to deal with the fact that a lot of her line doesn't like her all the time. And so that we actually hear some of those basically whispers. And in effect, it's going to be internalized negative self-talk. And so it is deeply psychological, because even though we probably know what it is in universe, it's also probably representative of the negative self-talk that often follows us. There's like a common saying in psychological treatment that like your voice is the voice of your mother when you were growing up. Like your internalized self-talk voice is the voice of your parents. And so it's like that. All the negative things they ever said to you is the voice in your head. I think so too. It's definitely because once you've undergone the agony in the lore, you can hear absolutely whenever, you can tap into and hear the voices of your ancestors, the other memory. What's interesting about this is at a point in the Sisterhood when Valya and her bestie group, pretty much the first generation, maybe technically second if Dorothea's higher up in the hierarchy, they're basically that first generation of the Sisterhood. So their other memory is the other memory of their specific family lines. Whereas in Dune, that other memory is unlocking all of these centuries and centuries worth of sisters and Reverend Mothers who have been within the Sisterhood. The idea is that you lock into that for advice and information that you need and stuff like that. And we see that being... They're probably less aggressive in the future. Yes. It's like, we're all working towards the same goal here. We all went through this. And yeah, you guys are in agreement with me. So it's probably less antagonistic toward you. But functionally, the other voice is also like the Dark Mother that like lives in all of our unconscious selves. And yeah, she's angry. Oh, yeah. And it's very much, in terms of the dark whale. I love this so much. So Haviko, he has his dinner in this whale, and also like his sort of meeting place outside is also like this, I don't know, it looks like, like the carcass of a whale or like the carcass of a giant animal. You're inside of the rib cage of a giant animal. And from an archetypical perspective, when we talk about the shadow archetypes, so we've talked about them before. You have maiden, hero, queen, king, crone, mage. These are all the positive progression arcs. If you're in a shadow phase, so either passive or aggressive, you're essentially in a shadow version of yourself. You're locked in an underworld-like state, because that's where the shadows live. They live in your unconscious. Another word for the unconscious from a myth perspective is the underworld. So he himself a common motif in mythology and in sacred stories and even modern media is that when you go to the other world, you are swallowed by a whale. Think Pinocchio or Jonah. You're swallowed by the whale and you enter into this underworld like state. But if you don't leave it, if you don't progress to be a positive, moving forward individual within growth of a life archetype, you are permanently in shadow, and in shadow you are stuck in the belly of the whale. And Havico has not moved this entire season so far. And the thing is that they keep intentionally coming back to this area, and Havico being the one who's like the reason why everyone's there. Like he's either there alone or it's a meeting or some gathering that is centered around him, like his family gathering, a meeting of political stuff that has to do with him just wanting to think by himself, and then Desmond popping up. And then there's also the one that's underground that also looks fairly womb shaped or like internal belly of whale shaped. Also underground, like it's no light. That one as well is representative of how he is himself is stuck. And yeah, it's definitely. I am curious if they intentionally wanted it to be a rib cage of an animal or look like that. Yeah. Because it does. And I've heard other people point it out, like outside of even like this kind of discussion. So it's like very it's a weird choice if it's not meant to be symbolic. Exactly. If that so it's it's very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so next question is from Jesse Emmy Garrett's on Twitter X. In your opinion, is the god that everyone is seeing one of the thinking machines that survived the war, or is it Leto II looking back from the future into the past, or does it matter and it's more about what they represent? Jesse's talking about the eyes thing. Yeah, and the like robotic voice that we see in all the visions. We see it quite clearly in this one as it's represented in like charcoal on page. Yeah. What do you think? So and actually I think I've floated this idea before, and actually Winters on the Discord also quoted this exactly, and I think it's at the end of Dune in the book. Paul says something to the Reverend Mother that's basically, look into that place you dare not look and you'll find me staring back out at you. And basically he says that to shut her up at that point, and it's because the way that the prescience works is for the sisterhood, they can only access the female line of their descendants. They can't access the male line. And that's part of the reason why they want to create the Kwisatz Haderach, because he'll be able to essentially access both. And their prescience is also limited because of all of this. And that's, again, a trait of the Kwisatz Haderach that they want to breed and create, is someone who has clarity of prescience so that they can steer the Imperium in the right direction. And part of the reason why they don't have that is because in their prescience, there is a place that they cannot look, that they stop. They have an completely crippling fear that stops them. They can't even venture down that road. And I think that's what they're showing us. Yeah, exactly. It's 100% what this is, in my opinion. And in that way, I don't think it's Leto, and I've seen people throw out theories about Leto II, about him controlling Desmond from the future, or is this thing from the future? And I'm like, I don't think it's that, because I can at least remember anything that has to do with Leto playing with time in that way. The way that prescience work is, it works as you accessing your ancestors and them in a spiritual, mental memory way, being able to tell you things, inform you. He can't go back in time. So I don't think it's him, but what I do think it is a manifestation of that area of prescience that only the Kwisatz Haderach could access. And it's visualized with two eyes, because the point of the sisterhood is that eventually their mission will be to create the Kwisatz Haderach. They haven't been on a mission to create him yet. And I think that's very clearly where the show is going to end up at some point, is now we know what we have to do, and it's make him. And
they're right now exploring this limit to their prescience.
And
what do you think, MC?
yeah, they're also exploring the concept of fear in that they don't have rules against it yet, right?
Exactly.
In Dune, there's literal rules like fear is the mind killer, fear is the little death, Paul's chant or whatever. But that's something that is like bred into the Sisterhood, into the Bene Gesserit, and thus into Paul. We see him as the output of all of this learning through Jessica. And they are very much crippled by fear and maybe don't even overcome it in 10,000 years, but they find a way around it with the idea of the Kwisatz Haderach to say, obviously, this is something that we can see could be gotten around if we had the right guy, basically.
Yeah, and so far, like really early on when we just had trailers, I at first thought that the scene where Lila's on the table, I at first thought that maybe was some sort of Gom Jabbar test because of the thing I hadn't looked at it close enough to see that it was a syringe. So I was like, is this a really big Gom Jabbar? But there actually is a scene in one of the trailers. I can't remember which one. But there actually is a scene that has a Gom Jabbar, and the ring is the snake with a Gom Jabbar, but we haven't seen any Gom Jabbar tests being used yet. So
But the Gom Jabbar is just the poison on the needle, right? The actual box, which I am speculating is inspired by Desmond. We'll see. But yeah,
I don't know. I think that this is the direction that we're going, is establishing these things, and they're all connected in this way where, and you've talked about this existential threat overall that the Bene Gesserit or the Sisterhood are dealing with. And I think this is what that reckoning point is, realizing that they need to deal with their fear, and the fear is what's actually holding them back. They're going to have to learn how to deal with that. But I think it would make sense if the box text and the feeling of the burning is inspired by Desmond in some capacity, because I think, it's
overcoming fear of destruction is part of what you have to do to continue. Yeah.
Fear of mortality. And that's the destruction that you're talking about. And I think that we're going to be delving into a lot of these themes a lot more heavily going forward. Because I think this season, there's been a lot of concepts that feel very true to Dune. But at the same time, it's also at a period where we're so far back in history that we're not at the place we are when Paul is the protagonist. And I don't actually think that's so much a Brian Herbert influence as we haven't learned the lessons that we've learned by the point of Dune yet. And so we need to get to that point. And I think that we're learning that as we go. And that's, I think so. I think that's where we're going.
So in the end, I think there could be why the eyes are blue, why it's not understandable. It speaks in a language you don't understand. I think it's more to do with just this idea that the Sisterhood is destroyed. They know that, right? The Sisterhood will never be the same after Paul and Leto the second, right? So maybe it's slightly misinterpreted, but it's more about what it represents, which is this existential threat of death and not being able to know how to go past it, which all people deal with. Even those people that deal with prescience deal with the thought that they might one day not live. They will unlive. And dealing with that is a very human thing to deal with. And how do you get past that? You learn to live your life to the fullest and to take advantage of it and to not be afraid of death. You come to death as a companion that you are greeting and happy to see after a long life.
And I think we see that too in terms of Jen and Emmeline a little bit. And Jen seems like she's very fearful of that idea and the risks that could cause it. Whereas Emmeline's just coming home to your foremothers, welcoming death as this friend. And I think it's a really complex theme that's very prevalent throughout the whole season. I think it's really starting to come to a head at this point. But
But they're not necessarily talking about it directly. They're just they're dancing around it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very subtle.
Yeah.
So should we dive into some archetypes?
Yeah. We wanted to talk about how some of the characters have changed a little bit. Inez, we feel, is actually moving well into hero, and specifically is because she's willing to go off on her own against the authority figures in her life. Although she is waffling on the edge a little bit because her parents are like, no, you can't go join the sisterhood. We need you here. And she just accepts that. But she is willing to stand up against her dad in front of basically the entire world. That's what happened. And so she's solidly in a hero's phase and she's trying to fight the good fight. She ends up becoming a rebel to her dad in a way. She is rebelling against him, but Desmond saves her in that case. So we'll see if she fully goes into hero, but she is definitely against the authority, which is one of the main antagonists to the maiden, which is the earliest life archetype, positive change arc. And the next is hero, which more people are familiar with because of Joseph Campbell, because of how familiar we are with heroes' journeys. Heroine journey, hero's journey. The symbolism is just slightly different.
And I guess we'll talk about our two other heroes. Constantine is also a hero, but he's a negative change arc of the coward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the coward is, of course, the passive version of a hero, which is he's aged out of being a maiden. His dad no longer gives any shoots about him. So he's no longer a maiden. His dad doesn't care about him. So he has to go somewhere. And so he's aged out of being in this like protective bubble where he's been a damsel or a vixen, these shadow archetypes. And sometimes that happens. Like you grow out. We see characters or we see people even go through these stages and you're like, how can they have gotten older but are still making the same mistakes? And it's because they've just gotten older. They haven't necessarily learned the lessons that they've needed to learn to become a balanced person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Then he runs
yeah,
away
he's
from the confrontation.
yes, like he very much he wants and agrees with Iaz and he wants to support her, but then when that moment comes, he chickens out and he
Yeah.
doesn't follow through with it.
Dad, a good old clap on the shoulder. Good job, Dad. I'm going to go.
And I think some of that comes from his dad like showing a moment of appreciation for him. And
Mhm.
then that's what triggers that cowardice is like, how do I stand up to him and then risk his approval now that I
Yeah.
might have it? Which is where
Yeah.
that's the point of cowardice there is not wanting to take those risks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about Theodosia.
Theodosia is definitely now, she's one of the acolytes and she's moved out into the world and is
Mhm.
embodying a hero, but potentially a coward in the way that she's unwilling to use this gift that Valya
Mhm.
refers to. And she's reluctant about this history that she has.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And leaving your home is a common motif in heroes' journeys. And she has left her home where she has been most of her life, which she is quite loyal to. And she even was fearful to leave her home. So she is most likely a coward. We'll see if the end scene actually has changed her, what she is when we see maybe the follow-up episode after this and see how she's dealing with the world and if she feels in a fairly balanced way in how she is taking on the dragons and healing the sick king. So who is the sick king from Theodosia's perspective?
Have a go.
No, it's Valya.
It's Valya. Because she was a balanced king for a minute there, but she's not anymore.
No.
You talked about her being the dangerous old woman.
Yeah, but I want to talk about our two kings that we have as well. But Haviko is still a puppet. I call him a puppetino because he is not moved at all. He went from having the sisterhood basically run his life to having Desmond run his life to now having Natalia run his life. And it's wild. We also have Natalia stepping from queen to probably king tyrant, so a shadow version of the king. in that she is willing to be super aggressive and step into stuff. We'll see if she's fully stepped into that, because one of the major themes of growing out of Queen is that the throne is empty. And so you feel like you have to step in to protect the kingdom.
Mm. Yeah, I'm curious where they're going to go with Natalia, especially once Francesca enters the picture. Because right now, like, kind of her being a tyrant is because she's puppeteering Havako.
Yeah.
Then, like, where does she go from there if maybe that's not such an easy thing for her anymore? I'm very curious.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Valya is also a king, but she has become super aggressive in her activities. And there is actually an archetype that I wanted to talk about, but it's not necessarily in like the life archetype. It's the dangerous old woman, which is something that Dr. Clarissa Pinkola says talks about. She was the one who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, and eventually she released this audio series where she talks about the dangerous old woman. I think she got older and she was like, I need to talk about what happens to the wild woman when she gets old. Because I feel that, but I'm feeling this too. But I have this quote, and you tell me how much it fits Valya. The dangerous old woman goes where she wants to. She says what she wishes, and no one should try to stop her or else. She will have a ready answer for them. She's clearly one who says, come with me, be with me, but if not, stand out of my way. I have a destiny to meet. She is not a coward, nor does she want to fit in, as we often did, especially when we were younger. Especially, she doesn't want to fit in. She cares to be appreciated by others, but is not willing to amputate aspects of herself or her gifts in order to be accepted or found acceptable.
I will not apologize for my strength.
Yeah. And so this is something that I was really catching me and really resonating with me at the end of the episode, and also like how she was when she was younger. Estes talks about how sometimes you can be an old woman in young woman skin. It feels like Valya's always been like this old woman who's like, I'm not willing to have my strength squashed for your comfort. And it is a common theme that especially women who find the patriarchy's shackles to be unwieldy do end up fighting against. And specifically, the dangerous old woman comes from fairy tale folklore, things that have been passed through the ages without necessarily a patriarchal lens to them. Yeah.
And that's Valya, in a way, herself, like, she's felt those shackles for so much of her life under the roof of her family, but then entering into the sisterhood, she's been able to develop separately away from the confines of the patriarchy that exists within the greater Imperium.
Yeah, and what existed in House Harkonnen too, right? She has always felt like she was gifted. And that's also something that Estes talks about with regards to the dangerous old woman, is that all women are gifted. And it is, Joseph Campbell talks about it, Maureen Murdoch, everybody, all women are goddesses, basically. The idea that we're all special. We all have this specialness in us as women, or as the feminine itself. It's cross-gendered. It is special. And she herself feels this gift within her. And at some point, you just have to not care about what other people think. Oftentimes, when I speak with friends who are getting to be of a certain age, specifically 30, they stop caring. They stop caring what other people think. They stop caring about what maybe their younger selves would have thought about a situation, and they do what they need to do for themselves. It gets more that way as you get older and wiser and realize that what other people's opinions of you don't really matter. You have a mission, you have a purpose that you are trying to fulfill for yourself. And so thus you are on your journey, just as Estes said.
Yeah. And I definitely feel that from the point of my life where I'm at, where I feel like I've grown a lot since I was in high school, but I still feel like in my early 20s, I do care about what other people think a lot more than I sometimes think that I do. So I'm definitely looking forward to that kind of point in my life when I do let go of that.
Be like a light switch has turned on a light bulb and you're like, oh, wait, none of this matters. Great. As your older mentor says to you, Hannah,
Yes, sensei.
just hope out there, hope for you.
Mm.
Yeah, so there are a couple of other interesting things happening with archetypes. Tula is still a queen. She's trying to protect the home, the family, her baby duckling, as Lila. And we don't really know what's going on with Lila. I have some suspicions. I think she's gone through her underworld experience with the mothers, with the voices of the others, with the foremothers. And that was like her heroine's journey, seeing the dark goddess within. But I think she'll probably awaken as a queen archetype. We'll see.
Yeah, she just like pops up at the end and we don't get much more to go off than that. But it would make sense. Like she's definitely done that change arc and that underworld journey where she's not a maiden anymore. She just simply isn't. And
She
she's
can't
not a
be.
hero
Yeah.
either. So yeah, we'll see where she goes from there. But yeah, she's definitely come out the other side. And so I
Mhm.
guess we'll talk about some overarching themes and motifs. I guess the first one that I want to talk about is the idea of dreams versus myths, which is something that Joseph Campbell talks a lot about, particularly in A Here with a Thousand Faces. He has this quote: dream is the personalized myth. Myth is the depersonalized dream. Both myth and dream are symbolic in the same general way of the dynamics of the psyche, but in the dream, the forms are quirked by the particular troubles of the dreamer, whereas in myth, the problems and solutions shown are directly valid for all of mankind. This is, I think, really important because when the acolytes are dreaming, it shows that they all begin from this very personal place where the things that their dreams are concerning are personal. They reflect their own pasts, the own troubles that are weighing on them, their own anxieties. But then as it progresses, they start to all have these same visions, these similar motifs and images that they're all seeing, like the worm, sand, Arrakis,
Mhm.
the eyes at the end. And so greater vision that they're seeing is this overarching myth for all of the sisterhood, all of the Imperium, even if you think about the idea of the sisterhood's goals being ultimately what's best for the Imperium, and so concerning the Imperium's fate. But
Mhm.
particularly, this reckoning is about the sisterhood. And so I thought that was a very interesting and very specific difference between dream and myth presented in the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Ursula K. Le Guin talks about how when you become an artist or you become a writer, you are exploring art, which is appropriate for them drawing on the page. Your unconscious will speak to you in the language of the night, which is like the personalized myth, but it will come from a place that is connected to the collective unconscious, where our archetypes come from, where these ideas of cultural norms or culturally accepted archetypes come from. And it will bubble up the shadows within ourselves. They reflect through art, especially. And so it was a really powerful scene for me because it came out of them in art and it came out of them in shadow. And it tied, like you said, both personally to start and then into this collective idea. And that's what good art does, is it has a personalized story, but it gets it down to the common language of our collective human existence eventually.
Definitely. I'm just so curious where this is going to go because I think we're leaning towards that like moment of, because there's this running issue of this worries about the sisterhood being divided. But I think ultimately it'll come to the place where everyone is recognizing this greater collective unconscious threat or shadow that they need to reckon with, it's going to be really interesting and very exciting. Yeah.
And it could just be that they have to reckon with the idea that everything ends and that their power in the Imperium could end, and the end being where Paul has been able to see. So they think that the way around it is just to find somebody who can see around it.
Yeah, it's a very I think it's overall like very consistent throughout this episode, not just because of the dreams that the acolytes had, but also just Valya having to make decisions and then things not working out and then having to work around it. And she still is so dead set on this. She wants to protect the sisterhood and save it, but she's having to recognize that there's something that she doesn't have, this threat that she doesn't have control over, at least not yet. And there's nothing that she can do about it in the meantime. This feeling of loss of control. Okay. So jumping straight into the episode then, we begin with hearing the sound of a thumper. And then Emmeline wakes up from this dream that she's having, and she goes to the washroom to wash her face. And she sees this sister acting strangely, and she follows her down the hallway. And she follows her into the chamber where that pool is. And in the background, there's sand raining down around her, which is something we've seen in Kosh's visions. And then the sister turns around, and it's Emmeline herself, her eyes gouged, and she slits her throat like Dorothea did. And I thought this was interesting because the choice specifically to have her eyes gouged, I thought was an interesting addition where you could have gotten the idea across with just the throat slit if that was like all that was there. But I think the idea of blindness is very connected to the idea of prophecy. And we've discussed this a little bit with Odin, but there's also characters in myth such as Formian, who lost both of his eyes, and this idea of blindness, but then sight through prophecy is again reiterated, and focus on the eyes is again something that we're seeing here.
Wasn't there also like a worm that was coming out of the pool?
Yes, eventually, like near the end, before she like sees the two eyes, the pool morphs from the
So the
rocks
moss
to the
and the
teeth, and then
rocks.
it's
Yeah.
the maw of the
Yeah.
silkworm, which is also interesting because later on, when they're drawing the worm part, the other Reverend Mother, she thinks that it's the pool at first. And that's why she's, Tula, did you tell them something?
Yeah.
Because why else would they be thinking about this? So also interesting is clearly she knows about what actually happened to Dory, and it wasn't just like a secret between the four of them.
Jen wakes up. She apparently has not had the dream and tries to find Emmeline in her bed. She doesn't find her, but she's in a trance.
And this is when we see that all of the other acolytes are having this dream simultaneously.
Yeah. But she's sleepwalking, and we get the flashes more of the dream, like Arrakis and the
And
orange.
actually, I actually loved the visuals they used for this, where because this is like another cool thing that they do that's very consistent with the new movies is there's like a very specific color palette for Arrakis, where the way that Arrakis looks at night with that kind of blue, dark, hazy color, but then they use the really bright flecks of spice in just like a really nice contrast of color that I just thought was really beautiful in this vision. So I just wanted to point that out because I loved that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah. And again, this thumper going off. And eventually Jen sees her and she's standing by the pool and she's like looking down at this knife in her hand. And then Jen runs over to her and grabs her just in time before she can hurt herself and kind of gets the knife out of there and holds her. And Emmeline comes out of this trance and she's very shaken and confused on what's happened. But the first thing the last thing that she sees before Jen wakes her up is the blue eyes in the darkness again, which all of these visions have always ended with the blue eyes, which is again why I feel very strongly that this is that place where the sisters cannot look. And that's why the dream ends there, because they can't go further. And then we cut to Valya with her uncle.
Avigny? Yeah.
Something like that. I thought that was her dad.
No.
I was
I knew
very
that was her
confused 'cause
uncle.
I thought that was her dad because I thought the other guy was her uncle. And I'm still so confused.
Okay, but who is Harrow's dad? Her mom.
I still think that it's Griffin, just because Griffin is on the wall in a massive portrait.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah, he was important, but
Or this guy had
there's
kids,
no other
but he
art.
calls him uncle too. So
So he's his great uncle. So that must mean that it just makes sense that
Tula's his
if
mom.
the reason why I think that it has to be Griffin is because I don't know why Valya would be so distant because even if Tula had a baby with an Atreides, I think she still would see it as a way to gain power in some way and use that as a manipulation, raise it as a Harkonnen and use the motherly connection. Plus, it's Tula who the Harkonnens are more willing to accept, I think, because they're like, oh, poor Tula, she was manipulated by her sister. And so I think Valya would have used that. Whereas if it's Griffin's child, then it's someone who I think that Valya would maybe feel a lot of shame and stuff because of what happened to her brother. So she can't even bring herself to develop a relationship with her nephew because she feels guilt over what happened to his father.
You seem mighty young to have kids.
Yeah, but I'm like, he could have been a baby.
Okay.
And like he just like, well, it's also
I
a
hope we
feudal
find out
society.
eventually.
And like, Paul has a baby when he's 17. So
Fine.
it's a feudal society. And Tula was young when she got pregnant.
I hope it's explained at some point.
I
Yeah.
want too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
so yeah, they have this conversation. She's showed up and she offers basically her services as Mother Superior. I'll get you on the council and you'll have a Mother Superior by your side. And he's totally into this.
Yeah. I think Harrow definitely. It's interesting because this is also another reason why I think he's Griffin's son, because he feels a lot like Griffin in the way that he also believes in the progression of House Harkonnen, but in a way that actually has like a plausible, realistic goals for that and not being shackled to the past. I think the way that their uncle definitely is. Like, I think Valya was right in a way. Valya was very much correct in her assessment of him and that kind of older generation of their family. But Griffin was always like, he was going to go to the Landsraad and he was going to do trade stuff for them. And that's exactly what Harrow's doing. And so he's very much, he's been asking for a truth sayer. He's asked 4 times in the past and been denied. But so he clearly sees the value in it. And so he's much more reciprocal to it than his uncle. And I also love the moment where Valya asks Theodosia to tell Harrow what he wants.
Yeah.
And she uses truth sense on him. I thought that was like such a well done scene. And because he's just better incentives for the fur trade. And then she no, what he really wants is respect and he fears pity.
Yeah. Absolutely. And her uncle's not really doing well.
No. He's got this respirator thing that looks like what all of the young people use to get high on spice.
Yeah.
That dichotomy between drug and medical drug, the spice. So I thought that was interesting.
As a kid who had asthma growing up, that's my Ventolin you're talking about. Give it back to me.
Oh, I remember those days. I had the big long tube thing. Oh.
Yeah, I actually had one that had a machine that had the face mask because I had quite bad asthma growing up. And yeah, it was the face mask. I had the full thing.
Hand inhaler. I also had the disc dust one.
Yeah.
I hated that one. That one
was terrible.
Really
yeah.
And then I had the one where you put the hand inhaler on the end of this like tube and then you inhaled it that way. I didn't understand the difference, but
so you get more medicine if you actually do it that way.
Interesting.
Yeah. This asthma
The disc
conversation brought to you by the Lung Association of Canada. But yeah, Valya has his hearing whispers, and this is again where this opening question we had about the self-talk and things like that. She isn't welcome. She doesn't belong. Yeah. She'll just betray them. Yeah.
And it's really interesting because she's hearing that also when she's looking at Griffin's portrait. So you can see directly where her biggest point of shame is. And also, I think reiterating that even the ancestral memories, they agree that Griffin was their best shot. Yeah. Golden future. And they blame her too, which is, yeah. And again, she's trying to convince Harrow that she should become his truth, basically telling him that I will be able to get you a seat on the council, the High Council of the Landsraad, So basically, they're a lower kind of house they exist, but they're not really the central part of the politics of the Imperium. And I guess for people who are maybe a bit more familiar with Star Wars, the Landsraad is essentially similar to the Senate, where all of the leaders of these different worlds across the Imperium, the Empire, come together to discuss the politics. And so Valya's trying to get him a seat there to make a big change, which is also something that I will make another Star Wars reference about a little bit later. Then we cut to Inez, and she's going to the dinner table, which is inside of this rib cage, for breakfast with her family. And she finds Desmond there eating with her parents and her brother. And she has absolutely no issues with calling things out like it is. And she says, "So we're having breakfast with killers now," referring
Yeah.
to Desmond. And then she asks her father if he's heard about the rumors about Pruitt's death. And he says that he has heard. And she asks, "Does it bother you?" And he says what he takes issue with is the disrespect and the talking behind his back. And then she says, "That is the definition of a rumor." And Constantine starts laughing, and then her father chastises him and then starts blaming him. It must have been the Racheses, and they only knew because you slept with their daughter and spilled the beans. And then Inez, but that's happening while we're focusing on Inez, and she says, "This is all a farce," and she says, "Your new attack dog murdered Pruitt, didn't he?" And
Yeah.
Desmond doesn't deny it.
And
He
this
just
is
says,
this is really interesting because she's basically confronting the predator too, which is also the main antagonist to the maiden phase, right? So she's attack dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were wondering who Inez's specific predator was going to be. And I think it's safe to say it's Desmond. And there's more
Yeah.
reasons later in the episode that I think
Oh, yeah. I actually think that they go through several stages of the maiden phase very quickly, including basically the marriage proposal. Do what I say, right? Because he's willing to like save her skin, and as long as she goes along with his mistruth.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this because there's some other things later on, and I'll see what you think about some theories that I've had on that. But yeah, so then we cut again to Tula, and she's talking to Jen and Emmeline about what happened with the dreams. And Emmeline starts questioning her about Dorothea, and Tula says she took her own life out of grief. And then Tula catches Emmeline trying to use truth sense on her, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
But then it seems like she gets snapped out of it, and she seems like she accepts that as the truth later on. And then when the girls leave, Jen is stopped, and she reiterates that she didn't have the dream, but all of the acolytes had it, not just Emmeline, and that Emmeline's just the only one who had sleepwalking. And that's where we leave that. And then there's a ship arriving on a Highliner, and this is now day one of the Landsraad proceedings that are coming together. And then we cut to Desmond in his room, and he's ripping apart Kasha's Sisterhood book and burning the pages, which at the very beginning, I'm thinking, again, psychic dismemberment and witch burning.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
absolutely. And consumption too, because he also talks about in that scene, he talks about it's like destruction of knowledge. So it is more consumption, but he hates this stuff. But it's often mistranslated, and this is the mistranslation of this. But he quotes Rumi, which is, of course, this very famous poet, Arabic poet. Many people are very familiar with his work, but the misquote is, "What you seek is seeking you." But the actual full translation, when you find a good translation, is, "If you know this secret, then you know you are what you seek. It is already with you," basically. And that's like the treasure that you seek has been with you the whole time, or you have your power that you've been looking for, things like that. But Dune Info on Blue Sky actually posted a translation of it. And it, the part that is really interesting to me is it shows what you are seeking is seeking you. But then underneath it, it says, "From the subtle nudges of synchronicity." It says synchron, but it's synchronicity. "The profound encounters that alter something of history, the manuscript illuminates something. Hand of destiny is at play." Do you know what synchronicity is?
Nope. I think there's a BTS song that's related to that.
Yeah, so
Or
BTS is often inspired by Jung, Carl Jung.
I think that's really cool.
And so synchronicity is actually when the collective unconscious, and very much Jung at different parts later on in his career, especially, felt like we were all very spiritually connected on a level, right? Like he felt like he predicted World War One with his dreams and things like that. But synchronicity is the idea that sometimes things happen and it feels like the universe has aligned to do it. You meet somebody on the street and you were meant to meet them. And so, what this thing is saying is you have to pay attention to these moments of synchronicity because they are actually guiding you on this profound encounter that will alter history. It's so neat. The people writing this read the same books as me, which is always great.
Yeah, this was so interesting. The moment that you said Rumi, I was like, this show is made for MC.
This show is made for me. They have made a show for me. Thank you very much. So, yeah. And I have loved this episode. I don't think I have as much deep things to say because I think it's like this in between episode where a lot of things will start to make sense. But still, what is being said is exactly in line with what I like to see in a show, and how it's playing out is beautifully executed.
And I think some of that, and we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but I think this is, in a way, so much has happened this season and there's been so much to talk about. But at the same time, there hasn't been a lot of movement. I think a lot of that is because of the archetypes. And so many of our characters are actually maidens.
Yeah.
And they haven't moved out of the maiden phase, a majority of them. So there's this like feeling of not, I wouldn't say stagnation, but just building up for an arc in a future season. Like this feels like a show that really is meant to be
Years.
like there's going to be a arc for this show that will conclude by the end, I'm sure, but the intention behind this show is for this to be multiple seasons, and there's going to be multiple seasons
And
worth
to
of-
grow the plots and what people are doing behind the scenes with this existentialism still hanging over their heads this whole time, but the machinations of mice and men in the intervening years to try and get themselves set up to a place by which they could, maybe we'll see the eyes change in the vision when they feel like they have the choice, or like the Kwisatz Haderach in mind. They'll see that the eyes have changed.
I feel like that might be where the season, if I had to guess, the season's going to end with them realizing that they need to make the Kwisatz Haderach or something like that. And that's going to be like their answer that, okay, now we know what to do. And then going forward, that's going to be this like really distant overall goal that they'll be working towards. But then the political stuff in the immediate that they'll be doing will be based on doing that. Like how in Dune, there's all of these political things going on, but they specifically send in Lady Margot to have Fade's baby because they're like, he could win or he could die, but either way, we need to make sure that his bloodline continues. So they'll be doing a lot more stuff like that, I think, going forward, which is going to be really cool and interesting. But we're meant to get there in later seasons for sure. So then the Emperor walks in and they start having this conversation, and Desmond suggests essentially getting rid of all of the truthsayers from the Landsraad, but the Emperor rejects this because then that would seem like I definitely have something to hide. And Desmond continues to kind of pressure him to like, hey, you should use me.
Puppets are the puppetees. So funny.
He says that he doesn't want to because the Sisterhood or the Imperium needs stability. And then he just leaves it at that. So he hasn't yet fully embraced Desmond, but he hasn't also been making his own decisive decisions either. Yeah.
He's still super passive. Like, even a puppet will avoid even making decisions, right? So he's going to avoid making decisions no matter what.
And he's not making a decision here.
He's
No,
avoiding it.
he-
Yeah, because he's so
not even, like,
passive.
he's not even like fully saying no to Desmond either in general. Like he hasn't decided, okay, I'm sending you back to Arrakis, or I'm executing you, or I'm throwing you in jail, or I'm
No.
having you do this job instead. He's just having him hang around.
And he's letting other
so-
people make decisions for him that he has to live with, which is the
Mhm.
definition of a puppet in the arc.
Yeah. And so after this is when we cut to Kieran and Horace, and they're meeting up with an Ixian, which so cool, and I love his metal teeth. And he has smuggled them a piece of thinking technology.
So what is an
And-
Ixian for those of us who are not as well
Okay.
read as you, Hannah?
This is so interesting. And this connects to some other stuff that we talked about, I think, in the first episode. But the Ixians have a lot to do with technology in the books. The Ixians and the Richesi, there's a quote, I think it's actually from the 1984 movie, where at the beginning of the movie, where there's more machines on Ix than on Riches, or however they pronounced it in that movie. But those are two of the kind of houses that are part of the Imperium, but more separate from it and have a lot to do with technology. And I think development of Holtzman technology, and the Ixians are known for creation of the Hunter Seekers, which are the little guy that comes into Paul's room and to assassinate him. But the line of when is it breaking the law of no thinking machines is often, they walk that line pretty thinly. And so this is where we also get connections to the Tlaxu, which are where we get face dancers and also all of the weird hybrid thing.
The Golas, which are like
And the
sort of
the Golas.
clones.
And also the cat people later on.
It gets weird. It
gets
gets more. It's not even weird yet. It gets so weird.
Later the second describes the Golden Path as preventing a future in which the Ixians create a self-improving hunter-seeker that eventually eliminates all organic life. And he calls this Arafel. And so in the first episode, when we were talking about Arafel and its connection to God Emperor of Dune, this is what that connection is. And so I think it's really interesting that this bomb thing that he's providing to them is essentially a hunter-seeker. It is run through events, and then it kills who it's meant to kill. And so I thought that was very interesting and very specific, because there's other people dealing in technology, but I thought it was very interesting that they're bringing up the Ixians, and obviously at the end we have Theodosia and the reveal with that. So I definitely think there is intention to do more with them going forward. But yeah, so this is really interesting, and also very pointed decision that they're using Turan Arafel as this idea that they're talking about, and now we're using this people, the Ixians, and then something that's similar to hunter-seeker technology, and then Arafel. So there's connections. There's connections there. Yeah. What are your immediate impressions on this?
It all makes sense. I was like, this is the way for them to show the rebels like what they're doing and like their big plan. But it goes so awry even in this episode that like I think it was just like Kieran as a character feels like he's very like stuck. I don't know how to describe it, but everything he's trying to do, either with Inez or with these rebels, doesn't seem to be working out because he's not actually in the right place for him, I think. I think that's what's going on with this character. He's not actually in the right space for his success.
Yeah, he definitely feels like his motivations are a little bit muddy for me, although I think that they're also muddy for him because he's also conflicted over Inez. But it seems like he has this greater idea of, I can help the Imperium and I can fix the corruption in it. But yeah, I don't think this rebellion is meant to be something that's like ultimately the answer or like the thing that actually solves the problem. I think it's supposed to be a failure within the story intentionally. And I'm curious what that's going to mean for Kieran going forward in terms of his overall arc.
He's not doing so great. I did love the spice will flow line. That was really great because, their whole point is that they're trying to democratize the spice production, um, which complicated feelings about imperialism. But yeah,
Mm.
Valya is recording a message to send to Tula, and she's like talking
Mhm.
about Lila and her feelings, which all seem like platitudes. Yeah.
I think she gets a little bit more honest when she says, "You're not going to believe where I am," and
Yeah.
because that's I think where
But
things start
specifically about Lila. Yeah.
like she's caught between this really human emotion and I'm still the mother superior.
Yeah.
And then she gets up from her desk and she's talking about it. And then she notices a spider on the wall. And then she notices that Theodosia's entered the room and she pulls out the card thing that she's been recording this on and snaps it. Whatever it is, she clearly doesn't want Theodosia to potentially have access to it, which I think is interesting because the things that she said thus far aren't anything of concern, but maybe it's the vulnerability there. I don't know. Yeah, but then they start discussing the plan for Valya to attend the Landsraad meeting with Haro, and then they know about the Hunter Seeker, obviously, because of Michaela. I'm just going to keep calling it a Hunter Seeker. She's going to kill it like she kills a spider with her knife,
Hmm.
and that act is going to, in her plan, um, allow
And
the Emperor to see their value once again and put his trust in the Sisterhood again. And so we see how that plan for this to unfold goes, which is that at the club, we see a couple lords and they're subtly exchanging thinking machines. And then one of them, his truthsayer, comes over and needs to speak with him. And basically, says that they've had some intel and been hearing these rumors that have been going around about what happened to the Richese boy. And she said that we've talked to our mentats and the chances of the boy being killed by the salamander, the thinking machine toy that he had, is basically impossible. There's no way that would have done what happened to him. And then we see that this starts to happen with all of these other lords and the Landsraad.
it was
Their
really cool
truthsayers.
because, yeah, we saw like how this like whisper network influences these lords to do exactly
And
what
like
she wants.
and it like cuts in between them. So like the sentence continues. Like one sister will
Hmm.
start one sentiment and then the next sister will complete that thought. So you see that like they're all seeding the exact same thing, which is that basically this wasn't an accident. Clearly something happened. This must be a threat to all of the other houses and we should do something about it. And then basically they lead them towards we need someone to bring this to attention at the Landsraad to open this inquiry, but it could be too dangerous if it's one of us. So we need the Baron Harkonnen to do it, basically. And that's how. Oh, also, before we get to that, there is a lord who we see with a limp. He has a
Oh,
cane and he's limping. And I know about him because I was curious about his character because he was in the trailers. And then there was a quote that he said he's a Hungarian actor. And he said that he has a small role in season 1, but that this role will be larger in season 2. So
oh,
clearly there's already been discussions around this character. And so part of me was like, who do I know who has a leg injury?
yeah,
Who would be a very adult man right now, like a middle age? I wonder. And I was like, is that the Atreides boy who survived? But I'm
yeah.
actually starting to question this because he's in the Landsraad meeting that's supposed to go boom.
Wouldn't Kieran be upset?
Father, whether he's Kieran's father or Kieran's relative somehow, I don't see Kieran being okay with his dad just being blown up. So I don't know. That's
Was it just supposed to blow up? Was it supposed to blow up everyone? Was it like a Fight Club moment where it destroys everything? Like,
the Ixian guy. He said really big boom, and then Theodosia was talking to Valya, and she was like, I'm concerned because if Valya didn't succeed, then she and everyone else in that room was going to die. And then also,
man,
Kieran was just supposed to open the vent and leave immediately. Otherwise, he would have died. I'm conflicted because I'm like, it would make sense if this is the Atreides boy who survived. But then if he's in any way related to Kieran, why would Kieran be okay with him being blown up?
Yeah, it's a little wild.
Very curious, but that is who I think it's going to be. Because, like, why draw attention to this boy having a leg brace and needing one, and then having a lord who's supposed to have a larger role in season 2 having a limp and needing a cane? Like, that's it made sense to me, and we knew that was going to be a callback. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to
Find out. Yeah. That moves on to the Lord showing up to visit Harrow, and I love that scene. It was like, "But aren't you supposed to be out doing stuff?" I love the moment where they like basically make the proposition to him, and then he's one moment, and then he like leans back, and then Valya leans down. He's just excellent work. Yeah, that was great. So pleased. Oh, Yeah, and she's yeah, you're a useful tool. And then we move on to Tula guiding the sisters through the dreams. And we've talked a lot about this already, but I really loved how it was like guided imagery. And this is something that Lucasfilm has used a lot of when they've done brainstorming with their artists and their concept artists. They use guided imagery. It was very much like that, which is a psychological thing that you can do to work through problems. But I did love the line, Eric Keene is here. God is watching and judging us. Oh, yeah, that was great.
It was such a well done scene. It was like how they were synchronized, but also not perfectly synchronized.
Yeah.
And you could see the passion behind the moving of the paper to the next page. The blocking of the scene was so good. And the moment with Tula backing away into the door because she's so overcome with horror over what's happening and fear, it's so good. And it's interesting that Jen does not take part in this because she apparently did not have the dream. So she's just helping hand out the pads of paper or whatever. But I'm curious if it is true that she didn't have the dream or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think she did, but because that's why she woke up, right? She was the one who was having the dream about Emmeline and then woke up to see Emmeline, I think. I think that's how it's supposed to be read.
I think so. But what I'm wondering is if hers was like different from everyone else's. If everyone was dreaming the same thing, where they wake up and then they see someone and then that someone turns out to be themselves.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the reason why Jen isn't saying that she also had one is because hers is actually a little bit different and she dreamed of Emmeline or something like that. If there's like a specific reason why she doesn't want to divulge that there was a difference in her dream, I don't know.
It's either she's never had one or she had one, and we'll find out.
Yeah.
We have this brief scene next with Natalia, and she has this moment with Desmond where she encourages him to go off after the machine users and fear the wrath of the machines. And this is the moment where we see her fully step into being a tyrant because it's quite an aggressive thing. She has a lieutenant and this person who's willing to do these things for her, and she's stepping in the way of Havico and doing that work for him. And then we move on to Yanez and Kieran in their will they won't they relationship interruptus.
Yes. Okay, so I've discussed this with someone before where they definitely have chemistry and I've been shipping them throughout the season thus far. And they definitely had tension in this scene. But part of me is also like, the will they won't they is getting a little bit too.
Yeah. Like it's. Yeah. Oh, they're kissing and then I'm annoyed now by this relationship, but I wish they would just decide what they were going to do with it. I did hear in Flying, sometimes you have to burn a thing down in order to save it, but and we do get the reveal. My father survived an atrocity, which I think we're supposed to assume that his father is the little kid or the teenager who ran away and Tula let live. So we've got that connection.
I am getting a little bit put off by them.
Yeah.
So like I still like they could turn things around going forward, but as of right now,
They're just annoying.
yeah. But
She has
also, I
more
think part of
chemistry with her brother.
she does have more chemistry with her brother.
Then soon. That is very soon. In the next, we got a scene with Tula. We got a scene with Yanez and Constantine. Yanez trying to convince Constantine to go along, and this is where he goes. He's like, "Yeah, we'll fight the authority." So he's growing up a little bit. But they have way more chemistry in that scene than we have seen in any of the scenes, which is wild and from a director choice.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that they want Constantine and Inez to be very clearly close siblings. There isn't meant to be any kind of sibling rivalry between them in terms of political stuff. Like, that just does not come between them. They
Mhm.
fundamentally love each other and stand by each other. But somehow, the intimacy that they have and the quiet moments of just being around each other and talking is a lot more, I think, natural and emotionally driven in a sibling way.
What if the actors got along better?
Maybe that's what it is.
It's just getting
Because,
weird with
like,
Karen and as though the
like,
choice to
so I
will they won't they is just getting frustrating, truthfully, and that's sad.
me for me, I loved the scene where he approached her when she was really upset and she was training and it was at night. And I thought that scene was really good in terms of the will they, won't they tension of we shouldn't do this now
Yeah.
and stuff like this. I thought that was really successful of getting that across. And I
I
was
just feel like
hoping
this
things
is
would.
the third time that they've done will they,
Yes.
won't they, and it's 3 times. If this happens one more time, it's what are we doing here?
I want it to be clear that they want to be together and then they just be together
Mhm.
if that's what they want.
That's a better decision that they just be together and then deal with the consequences of that rather than will they, won't they, because then I don't know. It's
But the thing about that, though, is part of me is now wondering if, since this is supposed to be a multi-season show, are they actually not supposed to be endgame?
one of them should have done something unforgivable, then they become an enemy. They had enough will they, won't they. They need to become an enemy if they're not going to be together. Yeah, there's just not enough conflict in this for me. Whatever they're
Yeah.
doing, it doesn't seem to matter.
Truthfully, I do think that maybe they're just not going to be endgame. Maybe they'll turn things around in the last couple episodes, but part of me is leaning towards this actually isn't going to be endgame. And especially because I think that going forward, the Sisterhood's going to focus on the breeding program more once they know that they're wanting to create the Kwisatz Haderach. So they'll want to pair bloodlines with specific other bloodlines in the way that we know the Sisterhood does. And I think that's they'll want to have a sister with Kieran maybe because he's like the continuation of the Atreides bloodline or
Mhm.
something. And then they'll want maybe Inez with somebody else. I don't know. And
Yeah.
so that's where I'm leaning towards now. But yeah, so what I didn't like was Kieran kissed her when they were in the training room, and then she said no to we can't now because I'm staying and blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't do this. And then she like shows up and is immediately all over him. And I'm like, how do you respond?
I think it's supposed to be from a basis of anti-authority. I'm doing what I
Yeah.
want now, rebellion. I'm the heroine of my own story, which is great, but it doesn't land well for me. And I get what they're trying to do, but this particular moment
Mhm.
was like, I feel like we've been talking too long about it, but on to the Landsraad scene. Cool.
Oh, it's
It,
so
it,
good.
it's a show of cool scenes. I loved how Valya is dressed as like a normal mother, a reverend mother. Like it's great. It's I'm in disguise. And we have this whole thing like Harrow's getting accepted, and then he has to come before the court and say that he is accusing her of all these things.
This is where I will come in with my other Star Wars reference. This was reminding me of when in Attack of the Clones, they got Jar Binks to vote to basically give the Chancellor all power.
Yeah.
It's like a little bit different, but like it was a similar kind of manipulating someone who's seen as the weak link to do the dirty work. Yeah.
And his comes in and saves the day and is you're not gonna do it. I'm fast enough. I'm going to do this. And she says her piece, right? It's great. And then Desmond's, whoa, we're just going to turn this on its head and actually accuse all these like machine loving people. And this is the moment of the sort of predator proposal, basically saying, I'm going to save you, little lady, as long as you behave and don't go against what I'm saying.
And I think this is also, this big monologue is part of what, already it's very clear that Desmond is seen as his predator, but in this, there's a moment in this monologue where they're standing right beside each other and they're looking directly in each other's eyes. And he's
like,
talking about the predators on Arrakis.
And he says, the predators in our midst. I think we had played with the idea that he was going to be the predator for Inez as like a thing that helps her like grow up and become a heroine. And it's fascinating what he has become. And you hear a whistling sound, which is the sound that we hear sometimes when he's using his powers, when he does the burning. And it's very visceral, this scene, this like torture of the machine people. And he also shows like the hunter seeker in his hands, basically to show, hey, I got everything. And Valya's like, foiled, entirely foiled. All the things I was planning got taken over by Inez and taken over by Desmond, and everything is going to like garbage. It's horrible. And then Desmond is alone in his room after, and Haviko comes and sees him. And he's got these like scars and burns all over his back.
Basically what happens is he uses his powers on all of these conspirators around the thinking technology. And then Valya notices that he's bleeding through his shirt. And then when he passes her, she notices that he leaves a trail of blood, which we know later on that collected it. But in this moment, we see why that is. And it's because this happened whenever he uses power is he gets these gruesome wounds on his back. And so this is where I want to ask your opinion on this. But to me, immediately, I was thinking, is this a beastly skin? And in particular, I was thinking of, because this scene is with Haviko, I was thinking of the HU fairy tale type of 441, which is maybe more commonly known as Hans the Hedgehog, which is also a variant of stuff like Eros and Psyche, where basically this king gets lost in a forest and Hans the Hedgehog, which is this rejected child who has a beastly skin because he looks like a hedgehog, and he finds the king and they like get to know each other, and then he's, I will help you, king, if I get something in return. And like when you get back to your palace, like the first thing that you see, you'll give to me. And the king gets home and the first thing he sees is his daughter, the princess. And basically then there's like a marriage that ends up having to take place. And through that is the burning of the beastly skin. And then he becomes like a prince and whatnot. But so
maybe
that's where my mind.
I love it. I think we have to see. Yeah.
Here's my other thing is, because we've been talking about how one way or another, Desmond, because of his abilities, is clearly going to be necessary for the breeding program in terms of creating the Kwisatz And so they'll need his DNA, and so they'll need someone to get it. Could they use Inez for that?
Maybe. We'll see. It fits all the check boxes, right? Because he's a predator, and oftentimes the beastly husband fits the predator archetype. But for the maiden, I need to find my In Search of a Swan Maiden copy. It's somewhere in my house. I put it somewhere before my vacation, and now I don't know where it is. I will read up on it before next episode.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that more, because it feels like that very strongly to me, but I don't know if they'll go that way. Yeah.
That's a bold choice. We have Lila wake up.
Yes. So Tula is with her in the secret chamber underneath the Sisterhood, and Tula has a dream. At first you think it might be real, but then you're like, how would Emmeline have gotten down here without the key? And then you see the sand in the background, so you're like, okay, so this is another vision. Emmeline threatens to expose everything, so Tula gets rid of Emmeline to prevent that, accusing her of all of these things and lying and being a murderer and stuff like that. But then after that, Tula wakes up and she looks, and the thing that Lila was in is busted open. And so she goes to the darkness and then asks a neural to wake up. And then we see Lila awake and walking towards her, and her eyes are blue and they hug. She asks Tula where she is. And then we see these branches of trees, which like the family trees and stuff. And that's kind of.
And this is where we affirm she has been twice born, once of blood, once of spice.
And this is where I want to talk about another, because in a previous episode, we've talked about rebirth and the way that Carl Jung delineates the different kinds of it. And we've talked about metempsychosis before. And today I want to talk about resurrection. So resurrection, this means a reestablishment of human existence after death. But there's some sort of new element at play. There's a change, transmutation, or transformation of one's being. Either it's in the sense of assumption that this body will be resurrected, like the physical body will come back to life, or on a higher level where it is assumed that the resurrection of the dead is the raising up of the corpus glorificationis. I can't pronounce the Latin, but basically the subtle body in the state of incorruptibility. Nothing can corrupt it or harm it or taint it. And so essentially the resurrection is, this resurrected being is different from its original state through the process of resurrection. And from a psychological standpoint, it is, Jung talks about how in mythology, this for the hero is he conquers death and is brought back to life and brings back to life his parents, tribal ancestors, etc. And he has a more perfect, richer, stronger personality than the original. And although he is also mortal himself, death does not annihilate his existence. He continues to live in a somewhat modified form on a higher level of civilization. And he approaches the type of the dying, resurrected god like Osiris, who becomes the greater personality in every individual, which is basically the self. And the self, as an archetype, represents a numinous wholeness, which can be expressed only by symbols such as the mandala, which we've talked about previously, or like the tree of life. And as a collective image, it reaches beyond the individual in time and space and is therefore not subject to the corruptibility of one singular body. It's the realization of the self is nearly always connected with the feeling of timelessness, eternity, immortality, or the personal and super personal Atman, which Atman is a Sanskrit word for the true self or the eternal self. So essentially, through this process, Lila has embodied the self in terms of that Carl Jung discusses, which is the ultimate goal of individuation, which is achieving the self. And that's what Lila's done through the concept of resurrection, which is what we see here. Her body has come back to life, but she's inherently changed. We know it at least physically because of her eyes, but we also know now from a inner unconscious spiritual side, she's also changed because now she's had this connection with her foremothers and is a Reverend Mother in the way that they are connected with the other memory. And so she's conquered death and she represents this larger thing for the collective now. And she's tapped into the collective. That's where we leave Lila off as achieving and being the embodiment of the self.
That was really great. I love it because that's something I always talk about, how like when you go through a transformational moment like this, an apotheosis experience. And I hope that we see what happened for her at the start of the next episode. I'm not sure if we will, but the idea is that you become a whole version of yourself, and that is inseparable from the universe at large. And so that's why you're connected, etc. And yeah, it is one of my favorite things about discovering this stuff and thinking about it and how it appears over and over again in our media and our stories and our fiction and our folklore and our fairy tales and our mythology. It's a beautiful thing that we all strive for, is to be whole.
Yes. It's so cool the way that they present this here, particularly. Yeah, I'm very excited to see what they do with Lila going forward. Yeah.
So our final scene is, of course, a confrontation with Valya and her uncle and her sort of shadow self, and also her animus. So we have the confrontation. She ends up not saving her uncle from death, not killing him, but just not saving him from death and allowing him to basically die. And then approaching is the form of Griffin, who we recognize. And Griffin is, of course, her animus. This is the masculine part of her deep within herself, her shadow self that she has not dealt with since his death. And this gives her an opportunity to face, to get comfort from, to embrace that. So this is an apotheosis like moment as well for her. But we find out very quickly that it is not actually Griffin. It is Theodosia. And she says, I was wondering why you were willing to do this. And she's actually a shapeshifter, which you read articles. It's a face dancer, which has a history in the books later on. But I wanted to talk momentarily about shapeshifters, which they represent change and liberation. And so oftentimes we see shapeshifters associated with darkness and the desire to be free, right? Shapeshifters like werewolves or vampires or kintsugi, they all have an aspect of social freedom that is outside of the norm, and they can make their own rules, even though they're constrained by very specific sort of rules to the folklore that they are part of. But essentially, they are shadow forms made real, and they're also harbingers of change. And so for Valya, this is a significant moment, and I'm to see what exactly it means for her, which we don't exactly know right now, but we will, I hope, next episode. I think because she is in this king archetype and she's been struggling with it, about accepting death. It's about accepting Griffin's death. It's about accepting death is a potentiality, which is related to this existential threat at the end of the vision. So I hope it's that, and then hopefully it'll play out next episode. What has changed for Valya?
Yeah. I loved this scene. I wasn't expecting this reveal. I was like, huh? Is she just hallucinating him? And then she goes and physically hugs him. And then he starts saying all of this stuff about, now I understand why you came here, why you did this. I wasn't expecting it to be a reveal for a face dancer, but I thought it was a really interesting choice. I'm very excited that we're getting face dancers. And I think that it was a very good way to end this episode and this moment for Valya. And she has this like really nice emotional moment where she's like crying and she's, thank you, Theo. And she uses a nickname for her. It was really
Yeah.
sweet. Yeah, I really loved it. Yeah. And so that's where we leave off the episode. And I guess just going over where we are with our alchemical journey, we're going to talk about Citrinitas, which is the yellow phase, and the third phase in this alchemical journey, and the phase of rebirth. And it's a stage, we're in the stage of fermentation or rot, which when the truth begins to be revealed, this is done psychologically through tests, trials, and failures, which all serve to be a test of strength for the protagonist. And it's meant to make the character stronger if they're actively participating in the journey. The acolytes begin to have dreams, which shed light on the truth of what the problem is, this thing of fear and existential dread that the Sisterhood is facing. And all of our characters face different kinds of trials. Valya is facing her family and trying to stop Desmond. Inez is having to stand up against her father and Desmond. Tula's having to deal with the acolytes' dreams and trying to save Lila's life and understand what this existential dread is. And even Kieran is struggling within the rebellion. So there's a lot of these trials and problems that the characters are up against here. And it's revealing things throughout that process. And from here, we're going to move into distillation and the extraction of the mother of the stone. However, as of right now, I'm not sure we're quite there yet. I expect this to come up in the next episode, which at that point would just leave us with the last phase and the last stage, which is coagulation and rubedo for the 6th and the finale episode, which I think would be a really appropriate place to leave things off. But yeah, so that's it for episode 4, Twice Born.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a really good episode. Not a lot to talk about, but also some very key themes. So I'm excited for the last 2 episodes of this season.
Yep.
Any
I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nope.
I think we left it all out on the floor.
Yeah, pretty much. I think this is just a really solid episode. Yeah. If you're wanting to follow our next couple episodes, you can follow the Dune Newsnet YouTube channel. You can also follow us at Podcast Above All across social media platforms. And you can follow me at Shihaya Spring on Twitter, X, or Blue Sky. And where can people reach you, MC?
Yep, people can follow me at Marie C. Gould on all social media platforms, or if you're interested in Star Wars, you can listen to my voice more on What the Force, which is my Star Wars podcast.
And Sisterhood above all.
Sisterhood above all. And may the spice flow.
We hope you've enjoyed your visit to the Sisterhood. Remember to like and subscribe so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and follow us at Podcast Above All on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky.